A stretch of land in northern San Diego County, California, is home to Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton, where its mission is to promote the combat readiness of U.S. operating forces. At 200 square miles, Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton is the largest open space on the coast between Santa Barbara and Mexico. It boasts a landscape of many unique geographical features, from its Pacific shores, canyons, and mesas, to its valleys, oak woodlands, and high chaparral mountains. The climate is Mediterranean with hot, dry summers and limited precipitation in the cooler months of winter and spring. This landscape has served the Marines well since 1942. Tens of thousands of Camp Pendleton residents today enjoy the sorts of amenities found in any small city. At this time, less than 20% of the base has been developed. With wide stretches of relatively undisturbed open space, more development is in the works. Your role in the protection of precious cultural resources during future excavation and construction is what this video is all about.
The Luiseño people, as well as the Ahoshman people, also known as Juaneños, we have been at Camp Pendleton there for, the archaeologists say, about 10,000 years. But as our culture says, we've been there since the beginning of time.
Families typically lived in small groups on high ground near fresh water sources.
Our homes were called quichas, and they were made like a dome type out of tule reeds or willow. They were dug out. There was like below, dug out a couple feet in the earth, and then built on that. And the reason for that was insulation. It was cooler and maintaining temperature, or winter or summer, and the hole in the roof so the smoke can go out. A flap door may be coming in. They were put up pretty quickly, I'd imagine.
They were part of the land. They were part of the land. And so they would gather different areas, and as time went by and numbers grew, they would have to spread. The resources were there. Resources were plenty. The streams flowed. Palma Creek flowed, San Luis Rey River flowed, Santa Margarita flowed.
Oak trees provided an important resource, acorns. On a year with good rains, tribe members collected as many acorns as they could. They stocked up for the season, then stored the remainder away in special handmade baskets called granaries, which held enough acorns for the next season in case of drought or a small harvest of acorns.
Gathering food in acorn season was a family affair, of course. As you go up and you start taking all these acorns off the ground, mostly, I think, as they fall. And it's a process that has to be happening when you gather these acorns. To process them, you have to crack the shell and then to take the nut out. And that has to be leached. You have to leach the tannic acid from it, or else it's real bitter. So that is a process that had to be done forever. And then once that's done, then you can actually grind the acorn nut and make a meal out of it, and then cook it in water, making kind of a pudding consistency. And that's called wee wish.
Those ancestors had a knowledge of not to overgraze, not to overpick, to manage the landscape, the resources, so that it would come back the following season or season after and relocate to different areas. The men would do the hunting, gathering, and providing for the food, and then the women would make the food, do the grinding, do the cooking. The kids would probably be out playing. Amongst our people, the women had their own songs. They sang their own songs and talk about their relationship with one another, with the plant kingdom and the animals, just enjoying themselves. Similarly, the men would have their occasion, with the men's songs, the songs that they would use when they were going to go hunting. That would bring them good luck. The spirits would watch over them and guide them and, allow them to bring something back home.
Although deeply connected to the land, but with no traditions of land ownership or private property, the natives were forcibly resettled to local missions by the Spanish in the 1700s and onto reservations farther to the east by the United States government in the late 1800s. Naturally, artifacts left behind by prehistoric Native American residents are distributed throughout the region and are often discovered at Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton. These materials and their archaeological locations are protected by a variety of federal regulations. With so many developments planned at the base, all personnel involved in construction projects must strictly adhere to the federal regulations protecting cultural resources. In 1977, Camp Pendleton established the Cultural Resources Management Program to support Camp Pendleton's mission and to achieve cultural resource management regulatory compliance. The protection of archaeological resources and sites which are on federal lands is guaranteed under several federal regulations, including the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966, the Archaeological Resources Protection Act of 1979, and the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act of 1990. The Assistant Chief of Staff, Environmental Security, is responsible for Camp Pendleton's environmental compliance and implementation of the Cultural Resources Management Program. The head of the Cultural Resources Section, also known as the base archaeologist, manages Camp Pendleton's cultural resources to comply with applicable federal regulations. Under ARPA, excavating within the boundaries of an archaeological site on federal land without proper authorization can be a felony. An ARPA conviction can result in a fine of up to $20,000 and imprisonment for up to 1 year. A second ARPA conviction can result in a fine of up to $100,000 and imprisonment for up to 5 years. Under certain circumstances, vehicles or equipment involved in an ARPA violation can also be confiscated. All of Camp Pendleton's accessible land surface has been surveyed by archaeologists, and almost 1,000 archaeological sites have been identified and recorded to date. The top priority of the Cultural Resources Management Program at Camp Pendleton is to minimize the risk of damage to important historic and prehistoric cultural resources as much as possible while supporting Camp Pendleton's military mission. Due to its size and the wide variety of important prehistoric and historic archaeological sites, the management of cultural resources on the base can be challenging. Involvement of the Native American community in archaeological investigations provides important contributions to both the understanding of the past and the preservation of their history and culture for future generations. Tribal representatives with first-hand exposure to field activities as well as archaeological monitoring training are employed as monitors. They act as a liaison between their community and the archaeologists, developers, contractors, and public agencies operating on the base. They make recommendations to the on-site archaeologist and report their observations to their tribal leadership and/or community, ensuring that cultural resources are treated properly and helping to coordinate mitigation measures if necessary. If culturally sensitive sites are identified by an archaeologist and/or Native American monitor during construction, work can be halted in that area. Grading and other soil-disturbing work may continue in other areas of the project, while all parties work together to find the best way to protect and preserve the archaeological material. Meanwhile, the proponent must redesign the project to avoid and preserve the cultural material, or it must be properly removed.
I feel it's important to save our artifacts it shows from our ancestors. Each one of these artifacts was used as a tool made personally by a man or a woman to do a certain job, what it took them to survive at that time of life. Each one was used to do something, and this is showing our respect for our ancestors, that all they had to go through to survive 10,000 years of existence and survival. I don't know if we can do that now with all the technology that we have. At one time, the artifacts weren't seen as anything valuable, but maybe to sell to somebody. But they mean more than just the price to buy things on eBay. They mean a significance to our culture and our people that have a connection, a deep connection with these artifacts that we're trying to preserve. It's a powerful place because you see that this is where life actually was beginning here in California. Without the native people, you wouldn't have the same society you have today.
Archaeology is the study of human history and prehistory through the excavation of archaeological sites. Archaeologists are trained to find, excavate, analyze, understand, and explain how archaeological sites reflect the way prehistoric people lived and how they survived and flourished for so many years. Pedestrian surveys are usually conducted by a crew of 2 or more archaeologists accompanied by a Native American monitor. Crew members walk transects across a predefined survey area as they search for artifacts and archaeological features. In the field, archaeologists use state-of-the-art geographical positioning system and geographic information system technology to navigate and record archaeological data. Once an artifact or feature is identified, the area surrounding it is more closely inspected to determine if there is a concentration of additional artifacts that may constitute a site. The archaeologist then plots each of the artifact or feature locations and records a boundary around the site using a high-precision GPS unit. Test excavation and analysis of the artifacts at the site can be completed to determine whether the site is significant or eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places, the list of significant sites in the United States. Following excavation and analysis, the archaeologist then submits a site report describing their research and findings to the Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton Cultural Resource Section, who then forwards the report to the State Historic Preservation Officer and Native American tribes as part of the consultation process. The SHPO and tribes can recommend additional work at sites or request that additional protective measures be taken. Significant sites possess integrity, meaning that the artifacts, features, and associated data remain sufficiently intact to yield information capable of addressing research questions important to expanding our understanding of history or prehistory. Additional excavation at sites deemed to be significant is a form of mitigation known as data recovery. Archaeologists typically conduct data recovery for research purposes or at times when archaeological sites are threatened with destruction from natural processes such as erosion, floods, or wildfire, or by human activities such as construction or grading. The basic goals for data recovery are to collect a sample of artifacts and to use those artifacts to reconstruct how people lived at the site, when they lived, and how they coped with a changing world. Artifacts encountered at Camp Pendleton's archaeological sites help to determine what types of activities occurred there during history or prehistory. They can shed light on stone, tool, and ceramic technology, survival strategies, and trade networks that the Luiseño and Juaneño engaged in with neighboring tribes. Landscapes shaded by oaks and bearing bedrock and boulders near past or present water sources often call for a closer inspection. These are the types of places where people gathered to process food, grind acorns, fashion tools, and cook meals. Sherds, or small fragments of various types of pottery vessels that were used for transporting water, cooking, and food storage, are also found at local archaeological sites. Pottery was a relatively later adaptation of Native Americans in this region, originating during the late prehistoric period, just prior to the arrival of the Spanish in the late 1700s. Marine shells, pottery sherds, animal bone, all of these types of artifacts and ecofacts provide dietary information about the people who lived here in the past. Archaeological sites in this area sometimes include features such as rock art, hearths or fire rings, rock shelters, and middens. Pictographs, images painted on rocks, and petroglyphs, images carved into rocks, may provide valuable information on ancient peoples' beliefs and cultural practices. During excavations, archaeologists collect samples of soil and use a process called flotation to separate samples of charred plant remains, to determine what kinds of plants may have been present in the environment and exploited as food or medicine during prehistory. Artifacts recovered during an archaeological investigation are always brought to a laboratory for analysis. In fact, archaeologists spend much more of their time in the laboratory analyzing artifacts and data than they do in the field excavating archaeological sites. The types of analysis undertaken often depend on the archaeologist's research questions established at the beginning of the project, and often provide important information about when people occupied the site, the purpose of the objects recovered, what the people ate, the kinds of structures or features they built, with whom they traded, and much more. The type of stone that an artifact is made of can indicate whether past people obtained the materials locally or by trading with another group. Volcanic and quartz rocks were locally available and often used for tool making. Obsidian was not available locally and was obtained through trade with neighboring groups. Artifacts provide a window into the past lives of the people who came before us. The Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act is enforced whenever human remains, funerary or sacred objects or artifacts of cultural patrimony are found on federal lands. A consultation between the appropriate federal agency and tribal representatives will then determine the appropriate claimant entitled to custody of the remains and the development of a plan for their disposition if they cannot be avoided by the project.
The village sites are very important because our ancestors are all throughout that area. They not only were born there, they died there, and they never left there. There's certain places that we go after passing, maybe to the stars or the Milky Way. That's our belief. But all of our community is still in the same areas that we lived and that are still there. So those are all sacred to us.
When somebody's at rest, that's their resting place. Granted, we didn't have cemeteries or whatever, but that was their home. They were there. Something happened. Their spirit was there. And the spirit's probably never left. Every once in a while we'll come by and visit.
Archaeological and Native American monitoring were successfully deployed on the Infantry Squad Battle Course Range project on Range 314 at Camp Pendleton. Prior to construction, a known archaeological site within the project boundary was excavated in order to determine whether it was eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. A small collection of artifacts was recovered during excavation at the site, and the site was determined to be ineligible for listing in the National Register. Then, during construction, the archaeological and Native American monitors unearthed deeply buried cultural material. Construction was halted as archaeologists carefully excavated the cultural material to determine whether the area represented an archaeological site. Excavation revealed a fairly large feature consisting of 3 individual cobblestone roasting pits used for cooking or processing food. By dating small pieces of charcoal recovered during the excavation of the roasting pits, archaeologists determined that the pits were as much as 8,400 years old, making them one of the oldest and most unique archaeological features discovered on Camp Pendleton, eligible for listing in the National Register. Analysis of the roasting pit feature and the stone cutting and grinding tools found in and around it have added crucial information to the study of the Luiseño archaeological sites at Camp Pendleton and the Southern California coastal area in general. We hope you now have a more comprehensive picture of the way the Luiseño and Juaneño survived and successfully used the natural resources in the area during this early period of human habitation on what is now Camp Pendleton. We also hope that this video has given you a better understanding of the role we all share as stewards in protecting and preserving Camp Pendleton's archaeological sites for future generations.